Okay, firstly, thank you, Sayed sir, and thank you everyone for joining today's meetup. Glad to have all of you here. Today we are going to focus on how to create robust selectors in some scenarios where the same is not evident right away. With that, let's talk about selectors. So today's agenda is to discuss about CSS selectors, how we can generate CSS selectors and use it within UiPath. Then we are going to talk about hierarchy in selectors. It is followed by the concept of regular expressions and fuzzy search within the selectors. And then we are going to talk about UiAutomation Next that actually redefines the concept of selectors and introduces us to the concept of unified selectors and UI descriptors. Finally, we are going to talk about an experimental concept of UI objects that allows us to share the UI descriptors that we create within our team so that they can import it as a library and start developing it without worrying about reinitializing the selectors every time they have to develop something. So let's move over to the first topic, which is CSS Selector. CSS Selector is nothing but a pattern which is used to identify HTML elements. It is a pattern that is primarily used by web developers in order to identify elements on the screen and to style them. It is also used by JavaScript developers in order to identify the similar elements and to extract data from the screen. We are going to use a similar concept within UiPath, and the syntax for doing that particular thing is in front of you. The syntax is a tag followed by a square bracket, and then you have to write the attribute name equal to attribute value. This is a syntax of a simple CSS selector or a basic CSS selector. There are various ways of defining a CSS selector, but in today's webinar, we are going to focus on the simple CSS selector. So let us see a case where these selectors are required. So for this demo, we are going to use rpachallenge.com in order to identify such kind of a situation where these kind of selectors are required. So as all of us know, that rpachallenge.com is kind of a website where all of the elements are having unique IDs, but they refresh every time we refresh the page or hit on submit. Let me show you that. And in order to show you that particular thing, I'm going to load the developer tools by going over to more tools, and here I'm going to select developer tools. We can also open developer tools with the help of a shortcut key that is Ctrl+Shift+I, and I'm going to click over that. I hope my screen is visible. Sayed, can you please confirm it?
Yeah, visible. And we first find the selector through Studio, and then we add the elements, is it?
Yes, yes. So I hope you can see the rpachallenge.com.
Yes, it's all fine.
So let me just show you how the IDs are how IDs get modified here. And I'm going to point to first name element here and just focus that in the input element of this particular in the input tag of this particular element, we have an ID of F12ON. If I will refresh this page, what you're going to notice is that after indicating this particular first name again, you can see that the ID has been modified to HY4YE. This is an issue for UiPath because when we are generating a UiPath selector, we mainly focus on IDs and classes. And since the ID is not static, the selector or creating a concrete selector becomes a challenge for us. Let me show you what type of error you can face. So I'm going to add a type into activity here. And I'm going to indicate on first name.
So Ishmeet, I think most of our folks are familiar with this. So this is nothing but a dynamic nature of a selector or an element.
Absolutely. So what we are seeing here is our bot has simply picked up ID. And since we saw that the ID is not ID is dynamic. So the first thing that we think that we should do is we should open up UI Explorer and we should search for any unused attribute within the particular element or within the particular selector that we can use. So let me open up UI Explorer, and as we can see here, we are having a couple of attributes that are available for us to use, but there are no unique attributes that we can use and that are static, that is going to help us to identify the first name. We are having class, but this class, if you will analyze the class carefully, this class is going to be same for every input box. We are having CSS selector that is generated by the UiPath, but it is heavily dependent upon the structure of the form, and we know that the form structure changes every time. Then we are having name, parent class, and title. We cannot use any one of them in order to properly identify a particular selector or a particular element. So in order to overcome this particular problem, what we are going to do is we are going to head to our particular website, and I'm going to show you how to create a CSS selector. So in here, the first step is to identify the element within the DOM, or the document object model. So this is the element that we are dealing with. And in here, what you have to do is you have to identify a particular attribute that is unique to this particular element only. In our case, you can see that we are having a typical attribute that are relevant to a particular tag that is ID, name, and class. But we are also having some custom attributes such as ng reflect name, and its value is equal to label first name. When we analyze this thing and we compare it with other elements that are available on the screen, we notice that this particular attribute is unique for this input text box only. So we can actually select this by double clicking here, and we can use it as a part of our CSS selector. Again, how do we create a CSS selector? Within here, let me zoom in a bit so that it's visible properly. And what we are going to do is we are going to do a Control F in order to search. And we are going to firstly type in the name of the tag. In our case, the name of the tag is input. So I'm going to type in input, and I'm going to start a square bracket. I'm going to place the attribute name and attribute value here. And you can see that just by doing that, we found one element, and we are highlighting it as well. Now let's see how do we use this particular element within UiPath. So let me go back to UiPath, and I know the font is a bit small here. So in order to show you this thing, I'm going to copy this selector within the notepad, and I'm going to modify the selector here. And once the modification is done, I'm going to paste the selector back into the UiPath. You can perform all of the changes in the UiPath itself, no problem. So let me just get the CSS selector, and here, the first thing that we have to do is we have to remove all of the attributes that are defined here, such as ID and tag, and we are going to remove them. And I'm going to define a CSS hyphen selector equal to single quotes. And within the single quotes, we are going to define our CSS selector. No need of making any other change. I'm simply going to copy everything from here and go back to UiPath and simply paste the selector here. I'm going to click on OK, and let's see if it still works. So you can see that double quotes has been replaced with by ampersand quote. This is because of the fact that UiPath actually deals with the HTML attributes directly. That's why it replaced double quotes with ampersand quote. But this was done automatically, and as a developer, you don't have to worry about this. And you can see that our selector is valid here. And let us try to run it once. So I'm going to just type in my name, save it, and let me see. We are going to also highlight the elements, and let's start running the bot. As soon as the bot is going to run, you can see that the bot identified this particular element successfully, and it typed the name. Now let us see if we make some change if we refresh the page, or if we make some change in the structure of the page, whether this particular selector stays or not. So we can see that the entire structure of the page has been changed now. And now we are going to rerun the bot, and let us see if we are still able to identify the element or not. You can see that we are still able to identify the element successfully, and our bot is working fine. You can think of a scenario where you have to fill up a form. So you can just create CSS selectors for all of the elements, all of the input elements that are available here, and just continue with your automation. Going back to our slide. So here we can see that we are also having a concept of wildcards in the selector. In CSS Selector, we are having three different types of wildcards. We are having contains text, which is defined with the help of an asterisk. We are having starts with specific text, which is defined with the help of a caret. And we are also having ends with specific text, which is defined with the help of a dollar. The syntax of using these particular wildcards are a bit different from the typical syntax of your are a bit different from the typical wildcard, a bit different from the typical syntax of your of the selectors wildcards that are used in the UiPath, but these are actually really powerful. So let me show you how to create such how to use these wildcards within our CSS selector. So what I'm going to do again is, this time I'm going to indicate on email. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to again copy the unique element from here, unique attribute, which is ng reflect name, and the label is, and its value is label email. So let me just quickly create its CSS selector. And its CSS selector is looks something like this. Let me zoom in a bit.
It's quite good, Ishmeet. I can see that.
Great. So here, now, firstly, we are going to talk about contains. So in order to define the wildcard for a particular CSS selector, what you need to do is you need to specify the wildcard before equal to sign. So what you're going to do is, if I place star here, so what you can say is that I want to point to a particular element whose ng reflect name is having a value or is containing a value of email. You now don't care if it is having anything else available in it. You just want to see if any particular element is containing email within its value or not. And this is how you do it. You can use asterisks in front of it. Another pattern that we can see here is email is available at the very end. So what you can actually do here is you can actually specify that I want to select any element whose ng reflect name attribute is having the value email at very end. So for doing that, you can actually use $sign. So just by using $sign, you can see that we are still successfully identifying the particular element. And again, now we are also having starts with or an asterisk. For that, what you can do is I can specify asterisk here, and you can see that the value of the ng reflect name starts with a label. So you can define label here, but it is not good enough. Reason being, for ng reflect name is having label as a starting value for each and every input box available on the screen. So just because of that fact, we are getting 7 different results. So we can see that using wildcards, we can actually identify the selectors, but we have to be really careful what type of wildcards we use and what type of information we provide in order to identify a selector.
So Ishmeet, I think you need to zoom it a little lesser. You need to zoom in. Yeah. Now it is fine. Probably you can show how you added the wildcards now.
Okay.
That is a little lower on the screen.
Okay, let me bring it up.
The audience can see. Can you confirm on the chat? Yes, now we can see Ishmeet.
Okay, so I will repeat myself again. So in order to define the CSS selector, what you have to do is just before UiPath, you can in order to define the wildcards, you have to define the type of wildcard just before the equal to sign. So if you want to see if a particular attribute is containing some value, you can use star and you can define the value here. So if I define email here, you can see that the email text box is getting highlighted. And if you want to see that if a particular attribute is ending with a particular string, so you can define $. So now you can, with the help of this, you can see that we are highlighting a particular element that is ending with email. Again, what we can do here is we can do a starts with. So I can say here, I need to find a particular element that starts with, let's say, label, because we can see here every value in this particular, in this particular attribute starts with label. So if I define just label, I'm indicating 7 different elements. What we need to do is, that's why I said we need to be really careful while defining such kind of details, because it can actually backfire, and we need to double check. But once we define a particular CSS selector, we can be sure that it is going to be a robust selector, and it can be used within our project without worrying about anything else.
So, Smith, if my understanding is correct, the wildcards, when we include the CSS selectors, work a little different. In our UiPath selector, we use these wildcards on the right-hand side of the equation, but here we are going to use it on the left-hand side of the equation.
Absolutely. In UiPath, you use wildcards to represent any missing text, whereas in CSS you use wildcards to represent any any containing text.
Okay.
That is the difference.
Right, really nice. Thanks. So using this, I can avoid anchor page, isn't it? Technically, I used to follow anchor page to automate this RPA challenge page. Now I don't need that, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can definitely automate this entire web page with the help of anchor base. But to answer the same question, we did a performance analysis, and when we found out that if you use context-aware anchor in order to automate that entire web page, you can perform the automation, you can complete the entire process within 80 seconds. But if you are using the concept of CSS selectors or any selector that can point to the particular element directly, you can reduce that time to 55 seconds, which brings in an efficiency of 31%. This is really huge when you consider any process that involves a lot of web automation, and the time is a crucial thing. So you can actually gain a lot of performance by just directly pointing towards the element instead of defining an anchor and then performing some kind of an action, because in that case, you are going to find an anchor first and then perform some action. Whereas in the case of CSS selector, you are just pointing towards an element and performing an action on the same element.
Nice, thank you. Now, what if I don't find any unique identifier in the child tag that you've shown?
Correct. To answer that, we have another concept which is called hierarchy in selectors. So let us consider a very similar case, but in this case, let's say the element element of interest is not having any attribute that can be used in order to identify a selector. So in our case, just bear with me as of now. I know this could be a bit confusing, but in our case, for the last case of CSS selector, we saw that input tag was having a unique identifier of ng something that was containing a value which was being used to identify the particular text box. But in this case, you can see that there is no such value available, or there is no such attribute available. What should we be doing in that case? Well, in that case, what you should be doing is you should be considering to implement a hierarchy. What you should be doing is look for the element which is just right above this, or look for the parent element. You can consider this as a child element and look at the parent element. If you will look at the parent element, you will definitely find some kind of an identifier that can be used in order to identify the child element. Let me give you an example of this. So I'm going to go back to rpachallenge.com. Let me refresh this page once. And let's say I want to extract address now. Okay, so I'm going to point to address, and for the demo purpose, we are going to assume that this ng reflect name is not available here. So by that logic, if I point towards, or if I indicate address, what I am having right now is I'm having this input tag, but then again, I'm also having ID, which I can not use. So now what I have to do is I have to create a parent selector that can actually identify this entire element. And then I have to point to the child element, which is our text box. So let us see how we can do this. So for this input element, the parent element, the first parent element is div. So for this div, you can see that entire box is getting highlighted, but this div is unfortunately not having any unique identifier. So what we are going to do is we are again going to go a bit up and we are having a custom tag of RPA1 field. Within this custom tag, we are having an attribute of ng-reflect dictionary value, which is equal to address. So what we can actually do is we can actually use this particular tag as our parent tag, and we can use input tag as our child tag. So let us see how we can actually modify a given selector into a parent-child relationship kind of a selector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back UiPath. I'm going to copy this selector, and again, I'm going to paste it back in my notepad. Here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove ID because I know that ID cannot be used in order to identify this particular element. So I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste this particular, the same selector above, just above this in order to have a skeleton for the parent selector. Now, going back to my website, here we know that the tag name is RPA1-field. So we're directly going to copy this thing from here and I'm going to paste it within the notepad. So I'm going to paste, I'm going to say that tag is equal to RPA1-field. The next thing that we have to do is we have to copy or we have to extract the attribute, and I'm going to copy this entire attribute and I'm going to paste the attribute just after the tag. So by doing that, what we have done here is we have defined a tag and an attribute in order to identify the parent first, and then within that parent, we are identifying an input tag or an input element. So only one more change that we have to do here is we have to replace the double quotes with single quotes. That's it. After doing that, we can copy this selector and we can paste it back in our UiPath selector editor window. I'm going to click on OK. I'm going to go back to edit selector window and you can see that selector. Okay. This was not saved properly. So I'm going to just add a space here, click on OK, and I'm going to edit the selector once more. So you can see that this selector is valid and it is working perfectly fine. What I can actually do is I can go back to rpachallenge.com and let me submit once more. And you can see that the structure of the web of the page has been changed. But if I validate this selector once more, I can actually highlight the address selector perfectly. So let us understand how this thing is actually working, because right now we know that, okay, I can make some changes in the selector and I can actually indicate a particular element. But how is UiPath understanding it? We can understand that if we remove the child selector. So if I remove the child selector, what you can actually see is now we are only having the parent selector, and here we are highlighting the entire address block. So we are not only highlighting the the input element, we are also highlighting the label and basically the entire thing, the entire margin, the entire block or the entire element. What this allows us to do is this actually allows UiPath to limit its search. It tells UiPath that whatever you are looking for is available in here only. And UiPath can actually limit its search within this, and just by defining another selector, such as I can define input tag here, and just by doing that, you can see that I'm pointing to the input tag. This is the power of hierarchy in selectors, and this is something that you should be looking into while designing or while determining the selector of any web application. And always keep in mind that if a web developer can can style a given element on the screen, you can definitely get a concrete selector of the screen either with the help of CSS selector or with the help of your hierarchy, the concept of hierarchy in the selectors. But you need to analyze HTML in both the cases. So having basic knowledge of HTML is actually going to help you in the long run.
Thanks, Ishmeet. This is nice. So I don't need to use an anchor base. I don't need to give robot the extra time to find the element and then enter the action. I can simply, kind of make my selector a little master than what it was before.
Absolutely, absolutely. So these are the kind of challenges that many times many beginner or sometimes intermediate people in UiPath also face. So by using such concepts, you can actually eliminate those kind of challenges, and you can actually create concrete selectors which are not that, which won't be changing so much when you think about it, because these kind of attributes are crucial to your web page design. So if web page design is only changing a little bit, you can be sure, you can safely say that your selectors are still going to stay solid.
Super. So Ismail, do you have anything now? For example, if my input is little vague, it is not standard. My input missing some letters, missing the font.
Absolutely.
Can we still find it?
Absolutely, we can do that. And for that, we are having a concept of regular expression and fuzzy selector, and we can use these concepts within the selectors to find a particular selector or find a particular element on the screen. So consider a scenario where you are accepting inputs from the user. So users input, and depending upon the user's input, you want to perform some kind of actions, such as you want to click somewhere or you want to do something. But those inputs are really crucial for your selectors. Now, what you have to keep in mind is user won't be typing the proper input every time. So what you might want to do is you might want to introduce a concept of regular expression or the fuzzy search within your selectors. And let us see how to do that. So firstly, we are going to talk about regular expression, and this is the syntax of defining a regular expression. So you start with defining the matching, and then you are going to define the attribute name, and you have to specify that you want this particular attribute to be found with the help of regular expression, not anything else. So I'm going to load a particular website here, and this particular website is our fake name generator. And in this particular website, we are going to focus on the phone number. Now, let me go back to UiPath and let me quickly bring in get text. Get text, and let me quickly bring in the get text activity. And here I'm going to point to phone number. So let's say I want to extract the phone number, and after seeing the selector directly, you can see that I'm having index 2 available here. Obviously, this is not fine. UiPath does not recommends you to do this. And what we can actually do to resolve this thing is we can actually go ahead, open up the UI Explorer and select some concrete arguments from the unselected items. So in our case, I'm going to select ANA and click on save. So with that, I can actually validate this thing and it is working fine as of now. But what if, let's say, I refresh this web page? Now, this web page is going to take a small amount of time to refresh, but let me tell you what is going to happen till it loads. What is going to happen is a different number is going to get loaded and our selector is going to fail. The reason behind that is our selector is having a hard-coded value of phone number. And this phone number is hugely dynamic when you think about a site like fake name generator that generates random phone numbers. But what will not change that you're going to see soon enough is that pattern of phone number will not change. So the pattern is something like this. Let me copy this in Notepad and let me show you.
Ishmeet, just to make our audience clear, we actually no need this ANA with a number, but to let you know if your selector contains a unique ID and that unique ID keeps changing, how to ensure adding that unique changing ID, using that we can build a stronger selector. Is my understanding correct, Ishmeet? This is what you're trying to teach us?
Absolutely, absolutely, Sri.
Yeah.
So here you can see that if I will go back to UiPath, again, this validate won't work because our number has changed. But what we can do is I can specify a proper pattern here. And for defining a proper pattern, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this number from here and I'm going to specify a regular expression. So before defining a pattern, let us see what is available here. So we are having 3 digits followed by a hyphen, followed by another 3 digits, then a hyphen, and finally we are having 4 digits available here. So I'm going to write a very simple regular expression for this thing, which is \d and 3. Then again, hyphen and \d 3 and a hyphen. And then I have to specify \d and 4. So this pattern is going to identify any number any phone number that is having 3 digits hyphen, 3 digits hyphen, and ends with a four digit number. So now, if you remember the syntax, so next thing that we have to do is we have to say here matching colon, and then we have to say we have to specify the attribute name. Attribute name in our case is going to be AA name. We are going to say here AA name is equal to single quotes regex. Just by doing that, what we actually did was we converted AA name into a regular expression search, and now AA name is going to look for this particular pattern rather than looking for a specific value. I'm going to paste this entire selector back within UiPath. I'm going to validate this, and you can see that this selected is validated and we are highlighting on proper element.
Can you refresh the page? We'll see.
Absolutely.
So I can say the most dynamic attribute of my selector, I can still use it and ensure I'll make use of it for building my complex workflows.
Absolutely, you can definitely do that. And what you can actually do here is, let's say the position of some of your elements are changing constantly, but you know the pattern of that particular, the value which is present in that particular element. So you can actually identify that particular element just with the help of the regular expression. And again, answering some of the questions in the chat. So you don't need any specific version of UiPath. You can use this particular concept in any UiPath. And now you can see here that we are having a number available in the same format, but the value has changed. Let us go back to UiPath and let us edit the selector once more. And you can see here, soon enough, the selector is going, this particular selector, let us validate it once again. Okay. Remove this.
Yeah, it might be the problem with the ID.
Okay.
So that's okay, Ishmeet. So we have seen this. The audience have already seen.
Now it is working.
Yeah.
Happens. Like if these things are not going to happen in demo, then what's the point of having issues? Okay, but yeah, as you can see here, we are having probably UiPath has properly validated this particular selector, and we are successfully highlighting the phone number. So you can see that we can use regular expression within UiPath in order to identify a pattern that is available within the element. With that, let's move over to the next concept, which is fuzzy search. So fuzzy search, like I said, if you're accepting any input from the user, what you can actually do is you can actually determine that you can actually assume that user won't be entering the details properly, and you can implement the concept of fuzzy search so that you can compensate for the errors that user is making. Now, in order to make this explanation really easy, I'm just going to head over to uipath.com. And in here, our task is to expand the above six options that we are having: product, solutions, about RPA, resources, company, and support and services. We are going to ask the user to enter the name of the dropdown or name of the option, and we are going to expand it. So I'm going to go back to UiPath and I'm going to show you how it can be done. So firstly, we need to accept something from the user. So I'm going to place in an input dialog. So let's say enter a value. And I'm going to say here again, enter a value. And I think I've already defined a variable. Yes, it's string underscore value. Okay. Once that is done, let me minimize this and I'm going to say click. I'm going to bring in a click activity. And in here, I'm going to indicate to product as of now. Let me see the selector. Yes, it is indicating to correct thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this product with a variable. So I can just right click there, choose a variable, and I can choose the string value. String value is actually going to contain the value of a value that user has entered. So I'm going to replace it with that. Activate it once more. And then I'm just going to place a log message here so that we can stop and identify what bot has actually done. Let me add a breakpoint here as well. So I'm just going to debug this file once. And in here, as soon as we get we got an input dialog box here. Let's say I want to expand solutions. So what I'm going to do is I am going to type proper solutions with proper syntax. So I'm going to type capital S and then solution. I'm going to click on OK. And if I do everything correctly, you can see that UiPath highlighted solution and then it expanded it properly. But let's say that user made some sort of mistake. So I'm going to restart this particular workflow. And then we are going to see what is going to happen in case if user makes some kind of mistake. So let's say I'm not going to make a very large, very huge mistake. I just make some kind of a syntactical mistake. So I can say instead of typing in capital S solutions, I'm going to type solutions with a small s. So solutions. And here, if I will click on OK, what you're going to see is even though spelling was right, UiPath is not able to identify this particular element. And the reason being is the default search type of UiPath actually asks it to look for the exact value. And what do we mean by the exact value? By exact value, we mean that the value should be syntactically correct as well. Now we are just waiting for the timeout to run away, to expire. It is a 30-second timeout. And as you can see here, we are not able to identify the given element. We got an error. Now, how do we handle such kind of an error? We handle such kind of an error where we expect user to make some kind of mistakes on his end with the help of Fuzzy Selector. So I'm going to hit on edit and I'm going to copy this entire thing again and I'm going to paste it in the notepad. Let me bring the notepad on the screen. And now what I'm going to say, all I need to say here is that I want AA name to be treated as a fuzzy string. Okay, so I'm going to say matching. And then I'm going to specify that I want to match AA name as fuzzy search. So matching AA name as single quotes fuzzy. That's it. We have defined that we want to match AA name as a fuzzy string, but we can go one step above, we can go one step further and we can define the fuzzy level. The fuzzy level actually allows us to specify that what should be the matching percentage, how similar the string could be, so that we actually get a perfect match. So what we can actually do is we can say fuzzy level. And in here, I can say AA name's fuzzy level could be equal to, let's keep the fuzzy level as of now as 0.8. Now, the fuzzy level is essentially the percentage level, and you can keep the fuzzy level anywhere from 0 to 1. I'm going to copy this entire thing, and I'm going to place it back within UiPath. And okay, with that, I'm going to run the bot once more. So I'm going to again enter my syntactically incorrect string. So I'm going to say solutions. I'm going to click on OK. But this time something changed. We can see that our bot was able to identify the solutions and it was able to perform perfect click over there. Now I'm going to run the bot once more, but this time I'm going to introduce a spelling mistake as well. Let us see if fuzzy search is able to handle the spelling mistakes or not. So instead of specifying solutions, I'm just going to say solution. I'm going to skip the last S. I'm going to click on OK. And still you can see that we are highlighting solutions and we are clicking over there. So this is the benefit of using fuzzy search. We can actually specify a proper, a particular element that is available on the screen without worrying about the user error that he could make while providing an input to the bot.
So, Ishmeet, I believe this is mostly used when your input is a kind of data entry process. So there are multiple users giving the input. One may type solution SS capital. The other may miss out the S at the end. One may have a spelling error. Second, if my data is coming out of an OCR, where I could rely lesser on the, the accuracy of the word that picked.
Great.
And this leveling will help me to how much leverage I can give. A 20% error, 20% wrong of the complete word, chalta hai. Kind?
Correct, absolutely. So the OCR point was really great. So if you're extracting some data with the help of OCR, spelling mistakes are expected. Nines can be detected as O and so on and so forth. So these kind of mistakes and these kind of errors can be reduced with the help of the fuzzy search.
Super. This is really interesting. Anything else you have? Anything more?
Absolutely. So we are now going to discuss about UiAutomationNext. So UiAutomationNext is a library that is a combination of technologies for identifying and locating UI elements. So it is a combination of full selector, fuzzy selector, image, which are all wrapped up inside your anchor-based algorithm. And we call all of these things grouped together are known as unified selector, because right now we are not using just one concept of like full selector, fuzzy selector, or image. We are using all of them along with the anchor-based algorithm to identify a given element on the screen. So this concept is called unified selector. Let me go back to UiPath and let me show you how you can actually use these kind of UiAutomationNext in your project. And for doing that, the first thing that you have to do is go to manage packages and update UiPath system activities and UI automation activities to their latest versions. Once done, the next step that you have to take is close your existing project. This is a mandatory step that you have to take, and go to settings, and in here activate the modern behavior. This is going to activate the latest UiAutomationNext library. Now, let us open up a project in order to demonstrate the capabilities of UiPath's UiAutomationNext library. And right now, I'm going to go to a particular website, rpachallenge.com only, but I'm going to go to its different page of shortest path search. And in here, we are going to focus on these two tabs. We are going to focus on typing our name just on the left-hand side. But if you have a keen eye, you can see right away that the patterns are really similar here. Before diving more into it, let me tell you something about this particular page. This particular page is really similar to the last RPA challenge page that we saw, that IDs are changing again. Let me show you what do I mean by that IDs modify or IDs are dynamic. So right now the ID is MFRCI. I will refresh the web page and indicate the name again. You can see that the ID changed to TGS T5. But another unique thing of this particular page is that if you will notice here, neither the input or neither the child element is having any unique, selector, nor the parent element is having any particular unique, attribute. I'm sorry, it was attribute. Neither the child is having any particular unique attribute, nor the parent is having any particular unique attribute. UiAutomationNext is truly the true power of UiAutomationNext library can be shown here, because there is no we can create a selector for this, but it is really going to be very complicated. So for this particular page, we are going to use UiAutomationNext, and the task of the day is to type name Ishmeet in this particular text box. So let me refresh the page once, and I'm going to head over to UiPath in order to show you how does the UiAutomationNext activity looks like within UiPath. So I'm going to open the main workflow, and within this workflow, let me zoom in a bit so I can 178. Okay. So in here, within the activity package, in order to find out where UiAutomationNext activity is live, what you have to do is UiAutomationNext activity live. What you have to do is you have to head over to UiAutomation section, expand it, and within the application, you can see that there are a whole new set of activities that are available here. And this entire set belongs to UI Automation Next package. Now, there are a couple of differences from the actual packages, actual activities that were available earlier, and we are going to discuss them right now. So all of these activities that are available here are only applicable, are only suitable to be used within within use application browser scope. So what we have to do in order to use any of the UI Automation Next packages, any of the UI Automation Next package activity is, we have to drag and drop this particular activity, which is use application browser, and we have to indicate a particular element. We have to indicate a particular application or a browser. So again, here is first difference, that now there are no multiple activities for application and browser. We are only having single activity that can identify whether we are working on an application or we are working on a browser. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to indicate our browser automation challenge. And right off the bat, the first thing that you can see here is our activity was able to identify that we are indicating a window. It is evident from the top of the screen. So I'm going to click here, and this activity got a bit modified to be used as an scope for a browser. You can see that browser URL, we can now see the browser URL, and this particular activity is also telling us that we are using Chrome browser. Okay, so now next thing that we have to do is we have to place in the type into activity. I'm going to drag and drop the type into activity, and in here, I'm going to indicate on name. Let me just scroll down a bit. And I'm going to indicate on this name text box target. Again, you can see that we are getting a green border here that indicates that we are indicating a particular target. What UI Automation Next package is going to do is it is going to identify that whether this particular element is good enough to hold on its own, or do we require an anchor for this thing. So once you click here, it will perform some kind of an analysis, and then it is going to say that this element or this target cannot be figured out on its own, and we need a particular anchor for this. So you can see that without you specifying, an anchor was automatically selected. We can hit on confirm. Yes, sir.
It's something like anchor based, right?
Absolutely.
Why
it is similar to
Automation Next? I'm sorry.
Yes. So it is similar to anchor base, just like you said, but the benefit here is that we have much more capabilities when compared to just anchor base. So in anchor base, you have similar kind of setup, but if you will notice here, that similar kind of setup can also be found in under origin. So we are having a name text box, and we are having a name label. If I will, so anchor base cannot help us to identify these kind of patterns. But in UI Automation Next, within selection options, you are having an option of clicking on validate. If you will click on validate, what this is going to do is, this is actually going to look into the entire web page and figure out if any such pattern, that the pattern that we just described here is available anywhere else on the screen. So right off the bat, you can see that it identified a duplicate, and it also told us that duplicates are available. Now, this gives us a chance to deal with the duplicates. And how do we deal with the duplicates? What we can do is, I can hover over to target. I can go here and click on add anchor, and I can define a second anchor. This is something that that our anchor based activity lacks. So we can define a second anchor just to make sure that our anchors are unique, and we are specifying on the specific target only, nothing else. Now, if I will hit on validate, you can see that nothing else is getting highlighted. So it means that we can identify this particular target by the combination of these two anchors. So okay. I'm going to...
So we're getting one more anchor, Ishmeet, here.
Absolutely. You can add another anchor here as well. You can add as many anchors that you want. So right now, we are done with this two anchor concept, but you can add another anchor here. So it totally depends upon your requirement.
Super.
So let me run this bot once, and then we are going to understand in that how this thing, how UI Automation Next package is actually able to identify a given element on the screen. So I'm going to type in my name, and I'm going to run this bot in debug mode once. So let me quickly change the view, and let's run the bot. What you are going to notice is not only the target is going to get identified. As soon as the bot identifies a particular element, it is going to identify everything at once only. It is going to identify your anchor, and it is going to identify the base as well, or the target. In a typical anchor base, the time wastage that happens is we firstly identify a particular anchor, and then we identify a particular element. But due to some clever programming, UI Automation Next package is actually able to identify all of these things simultaneously. And let us see what went into that clever programming. So we obviously typed into the proper box, and here, if we edit the target once more, we can see that we are highlighting on the same, we are highlighting at the same point again. So here, if I hover over the target, you can see that I'm having an option of settings here. By clicking on this thing, my selection options will get expanded. And in here, let me also do one thing. Let me refresh this page once. Okay. So let us edit the target. Okay. So I'm going to edit, go to settings, and in here, what you can see is, just like we talked before, we are having three different concepts available here in order to identify just the target. We are having selector, we are having fuzzy selector, and we are having image. Clearly, this particular package is right now not using selector. The reason being is selector is actually using ID, and we know that IDs are not constant within this particular page. So if I will highlight this thing again, you can see that nothing was found. Due to this fact, we are actually, in this particular case, UI Automation Next package decided to not use selector. It is just using fuzzy selector and image. And you can see that we can also specify the accuracy scale for both of them. The same setup is also available for anchor, selector, fuzzy selector, and image. And what I think we should appreciate here is that we are using a combination of all of the existing technologies. So let's say in future there is some small change within our web page, due to which one identification technology got failed. UiPath can still identify the given element on the screen with the help of the other technologies. Let's say if selector got failed, it can use fuzzy selector, it can use image, and it is already using anchor-based technology or anchor-based algorithm to identify the target. So this combination of the technologies actually allow us to create a much more robust, identifier of a given element. And since we are using all of these concepts all together, we are calling them unified selector or unified selector or UI descriptors.
Ishmeet, it's something like I'm using selector, I'm using fuzzy selector, and I'm also using an image. All these three technologies together to ensure my selector is unbreakable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm bringing Iron Man, I'm bringing Thor, I'm bringing Hulk to the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is really cool. Okay, but anything else we can wrap?
Yes.
You still have the surprises on?
Absolutely. So the last topic of the day is UI objects. So UI objects is still an experimental feature, but this is a really interesting feature when we talk about the reusability of your UI descriptor or selectors essentially. So what we can do in UI objects is we can club the UI descriptors, and UI descriptors are just your selectors, unified targets, computer vision targets, and we can club them in your UI applications. Then we can use the concept of UI library to export them into Orchestrator or within your local repository, so that they can be shared amongst your teams and it can be imported and used within different projects. So let me quickly show you a demo for that as well. Again, in order to use UI objects, you need to have this modern option, activated, modern behavior option activated. Just go back to your project, and here under object repository, what you have to do is you are having two options available here. First one is project UI descriptors, and next one is UI libraries. Under project UI descriptors, you can actually right click and create an application. In my case, I'm going to create RPA challenge. I'm going to click on create application, and that's it. I have defined a UI application for my group of UI descriptors. Next thing that we have to do is we have to specify the selector or the identifier of the, the entire application, the entire scope of the application. So again, the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this hamburger menu, and within this hamburger menu, the second last option is of add screen to UI objects. After doing this, I can simply click on RPA automation challenge, and I can click on finish. You can see that our identifier was added within the application. And if I want to add the identifier of a specific element which is available on the screen, I can do that as well by clicking on the hamburger menu and clicking on add to UI objects. Now, what I have to do is I have to actually click on the application identifier that we defined earlier, and let me rename this to name identifier. Let's call left name identifier. I'm going to click on finish, and you can see that a sort of hierarchy is defined here, that for this particular application, when we are dealing with this particular page, and we are having an element selector which is available here. So let's see how do we use within our project, with this particular concept within our project. And then what we are going to do is we are going to see how to export it. So I'm going to again place a use application browser activity here, but this time I'm not going to indicate anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the second option of dragging the selector right over this particular activity. So I can simply drag the selector over this particular activity, and just like that, this particular activity is now pointing to our application or the desired application. And we can even see that the screenshot and the URLs are also preserved. This is a benefit of using this thing, that the details are also preserved. Now, let me add some kind of action. Earlier, we were typing something, but let's say I want to get some kind of text. So I can use get text. Let me place get text activity here. And what I can do as of now is I'm having my left name identifier available here. I can simply drag and drop it over my activity. And in here, again, you can see that the selector is working perfectly fine. I can edit the target just to show you. I'm going to hit on edit, unlink and edit. And you can see that we are pointing to the perfect element, the element that we want to work with. This is the power of UI. This is the power of UI descriptors. We can actually point to the elements using the existing UI descriptor. So the question arises. How do we export or how do we share this information within different projects? Well, for doing that, what you can actually do is, if you will see here, there is a very small icon that allows you to export this entire package, this entire concept or this entire feature as a UI library project. You can actually export it. I can export it as my UI library project. It is going to take some time to generate all the files, but once it is done, what we are going to do is we are going to go to design tab and publish this library. So let's just wait for this, for the dependencies to be added. And once the dependencies are added, you can see that we are still having our object repository available here. I'm going to go to design. I'm going to hit on publish, and I'm going to publish this entire thing on my desktop. So I'm just for the demo, I'm publishing this on my desktop, but you can actually publish this particular thing as a library on your orchestrator as well. So I'm going to hit on publish. And again, this entire package has been published on my desktop. And you can see that a NUPKG package is available on my desktop. Let me quickly import this package in my project. I'm going to open, let's say, UiAutomation Next. Okay, with that opened up, I'm going to let me minimize this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the existing, existing identifiers that we defined earlier. I'm going to open the main workflow and delete this as well. Now, in order to import a UI library, what you need to do is you need to go to manage packages. And for demo, I'm already pointing to my desktop, but in order to point to any particular local directory, you have to just go to settings and you have to add your local directory, something like this. You have to give a name and define the source. Source could be a URL, or source could be path of your any path on your computer or laptop. So I'm just going to go to desktop, and here I can see that descriptors are available. I'm just going to download them or install them, and I'm going to hit on save. As soon as this package gets saved, you can see that within UI libraries, I'm having all of the identifiers available, and I can again do the same thing. I can drag and drop my browser scope, and I can drag and drop my selector as well, or selector or UI identifier. This is going to take some time to get used to UI identifiers or the unified selector. But yes, you can just simply drag and drop your identifiers from the library that you imported. The another thing that you can actually do is you can actually right click here and add this entire thing to the snippets, so that now within the snippets, you can actually drag and drop the selectors without ever going to the UI repository ever. So this is another benefit of using this concept. You can see that I have already defined a couple of UI descriptors for calculator and for RPA challenge sites. With that, our webinar is concluded.
Super. Ishmeet, if I wrap the last thing, I can create a selector, store it, give it to others. So they wanted to use it, let them use it. It is remaking selector as a reusable component. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The big pain point, the SAP regression. So whenever my SAP application is upgraded, I don't want all developers sitting and doing it. One developer does the regression. He captures all the selectors, pushes it to the team, orchestrator, or a repository, where other developers simply pick it and replace.
Absolutely. That is a really great point. So let's say a particular application is used in five of your automations. If that particular application changes, definitely all of the 5 automation are going to get affected. Typically, you would go back and make the same kind of changes in all of your 5 automations. But now what you can do is you can just modify your UI library and upgrade the package in remaining applications. That's it. That's all you need to do in order to compensate for the changes that are made by the client on its application.
Super. Let me recall from the audience side. I understood how to avoid using anchor base. How can I change my selector by adding some CSS selector components? Second, if the parent ID, the child ID does not have anything unique, how can I relate it to the parent ID? This is what you taught us first, correct?
Absolutely.
Second, if the spelling changes, if the format or the pattern changes, I can still use fuzzy selectors. I can still use regex in my selector and play with it. 3, super. Then the superstar of the day, the UiAutomationNext, and thanks for presenting for the first time ever demo on this. So I can use a UiAutomationNext and I simply do magic.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely.
Ishmeet, it's wonderful session. Thanks, and super love to you. Guys, you can find this session recording soon on the link that is shared, and it will also be there on the LinkedIn. Go ahead and grab it. Any quick questions? Ishmeet, you can take the questions. I tried answering a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sayan. And I think we can unmute the mics now.
Yeah, people, you can unmute and ask any question.
Ishmeet, not about this. Ishmeet, Dushyant here. I would like to get a session on libraries, UiPath libraries.
Sure, we are going to plan the same for the next round or coming session.
Yeah.
Dushyant, just to help you, we already done one. I'll try to send you the link.
Yeah, Actually, I need to get one kind of requirement over there. Like we used to give input values, right? Can I get in a drop down kind of stuff as an input value?
Are you talking about asking, like getting the input from the user in the form of a dropdown?
No, no. Actually, to my project, I would like to define a library where I want to use it repeatedly. I have defined it, but I need to select a drop down whenever I call that library in code level itself. Like if I want to write a log, customized log, I need to select the drop down info or error like that.
Correct, correct.
Instead of writing in separately as a value.
Mhm.
Just to divert here, guys. Just let us know on the chat window how was the session. And yes, Ishmeet, you can continue with the question.
Yes, so Dushyant, I think we can connect separately for this after the session, because since this requirement is not specifically related to UI descriptors and everything, like the content of, but definitely we can connect for this after the session and we can figure something out. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, hi Ishmeet, Arvind here.
Hi, Arvind.
Yeah, Ishmeet, about the last concept you had shared, right, about selectors being available everywhere, right, like a library.
Mm-hmm.
That would be as similar as having an asset which stores the selector as a string, and we can update it, whenever the application updates, right?
Well, sort of, but think about it. If you're having within an asset, at max you can define only one selector. Like if you're having limited amount of selector, then definitely go ahead and define an asset. But if you're dealing with a very large automation in which you have multiple pages, it makes more sense to define a single library than defining n number of assets.
Okay, and the requirement to have this is the latest version of UiPath, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Again,
So I think the way to go with older versions would be at the moment like an asset and have it.
Look, I would not suggest asset as of now, because asset is something, I would rather suggest using the configuration or using some other concept that we talked about in our webinar today, such as CSS Selector or regular expression, in order to generate the complete selector so that they won't change a lot. But saving selector anywhere outside, that is something that personally I won't recommend.
Okay. Got
Again,
it.
I've seen this thing happening, but I don't recommend that.
Okay. Got it. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for being an amazing audience as usual.
Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you had a nice time and you learned something. So thank you. Are we having some other questions? Yes.
I just pasted all the upcoming events of the September and the October first week. Please find the links in the chat, and you can find the meetups there.
Thanks, Divya Shri.
And I also shared the LinkedIn for Ishmeet, Saeed, and myself. So in case you have any queries, please reach out to us.
So Smith, I have just means not a question, but just means the clarification on that descriptor part which you have given. So on this, basically using this part, we can basically separate our UI part to basically a logical part, right? So that to create as a library. So if something gonna change, so we can only change on that part only.
Yeah, that was the concept of UI objects. The
Okay.
UI descriptor is something else. In UI descriptor, you can combine the power of full selector, fuzzy selector, and image. And all of them, along with the anchor-based algorithm, you can combine all of them in order to point or indicate a particular element on the screen. So,
yeah, understood. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
No.
Ishmeet, Divyanshu here.
Divyanshu.
You told about that input tag and something like that tagging. Is it available in 2019.4 and 10 version?
Look, yeah, it is definitely available in that, and it is not a new thing again. But again, this is something that I feel like all of us should be using a lot, because there are keys of creating a concrete selector available right on the screen. But it is just that we have to expand this window and look for it ourselves. Okay. If we are able to do that, we can actually avoid using all of the image automation activities and all of the sometimes computer vision activity as well. but we can avoid using them, and we can actually rely on the detail that is available on the DOM, or this is also called document object model.
Okay. Thanks.
Super. That's it. We are